Welcome to Class PM. Have you ever gone out on a field trip? If yes, have you ever seen a wildlife sanctuary or have you ever visited a national park? Now, why am I talking about all this? Right. Why do we have these national parks, or you say like wildlife sanctuaries, or like biodiversity areas? What do they do? Yes, they deal with the conservation of plants and animals. So as I've told you, this lesson we are going to learn about conservation of plants and animals. So before I go with the conservation of plants and animals, I'll tell you one thing. Biologically, these plants are called as flora and all the animals on the earth are called as fauna. Right. So we know that these plants are essential living organism for every one of us. Right. If there are no plants, will we be able to survive? Obviously not. We know that we depend upon plants for our survival, but we, for our own benefits, cutting down the forest. So what is this process of cutting down the forest called as, or cutting the trees in the forest called as? It is said to be deforestation. We know that deforestation will lead to major consequences. In spite of that, we, for our self benefit, we clear off the forest. Now, when I talk about clearing the forest, or when we talk about the cutting down of the forest, why one has to do this? Yes, we know that as evolution progressed, there is a huge number of population which has been increasing rapidly, right? To meet the demands of the population, we need to cut down the forest. Now, why should we cut down the forest to meet the demand of the population? Yes, the basic needs for every human being is food and shelter. Food and shelter. So, if the population is increased, you have to cut down the forest so that you can have land for cultivation, so that you can provide food for every individual, so that there is no competence between the human beings or fellow beings for the food. At the same time, it is not only that you need only food, you also need shelter. You also need shelter. So, if there is no shelter, where will you live? Right? So, to build up our shelters, or to build up factories, to build up industries, or to build any restaurants, or to build schools, or to build in whatever, you are cutting down the trees. That means you are deforesting a place. That means you are cutting down the trees. So that means to end with benefits. To end with benefits, we are cutting down the trees. So actually, we are cutting it for the cultivation of land, or we are cutting down the trees for our own benefits. Apart from that, there are also some natural things which naturally happen, which will lead to deforestation. That is forest fires and these droughts. Forest fires and droughts. So we know that we, being human beings, for our self benefit, are clearing the forest so that we can survive. Now, let us see what are the consequences that we have to bear when we cut down these forests for our benefits. So, let us write down the consequences of deforestation. So, when you talk about the consequences of deforestation, the very first consequence is increase in temperature. Increase in temperature. See, why is the temperature being increased? When you cut down the forest, the temperature will obviously increase because the sun's rays reach the earth's crust, and all the rays will not be absorbed into the earth crust. They are reflected back, and when they are reflected back, the trees take up this heat and leave you shade, right? Leave you shade. So that is the reason. Take an example. If you're walking on a road on a hot sunny day, you feel suffocating, right? You sweat like anything if there is no air. And when suddenly you find a tree shade, and when you just go and stand under the shade of the tree, you feel it's cool and you feel that you can happily stay there for longer time, right? That is because the temperature is all the time regulated by the trees which are present on the earth. So when you're cutting down the trees, definitely there is increase in the temperature. And the next thing is the increase in levels of carbon dioxide. What is the next consequence? Increase in the levels of carbon dioxide. Now, how come carbon dioxide is related to this deforestation? Yes, it is related. We all know that plants undergo process of photosynthesis, for which they use carbon dioxide. And what are the sources of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? That is, from our automobiles, we release carbon dioxide, from the smoke which is released from the industries, and from the forest fires, and you can say from the process of respiration, like we give out carbon dioxide. So this carbon dioxide, which is present in 0.03% in the atmosphere, will be used up, which has been released from various sources, will be used up by the plants for the process of photosynthesis. And if the plants are cut down, where will the carbon dioxide go? Do you know what happens to the carbon dioxide? Yes, it ultimately will get reflected into the atmosphere, or escape into the atmosphere. And you know what does the carbon dioxide do? It will trap the heat energy from the sunlight, and it will make the earth warmer and warmer day by day. So ultimately this will lead to rise in temperature. At the same time, it is making your earth warmer and warmer day by day, due to which you see there is global warming. Global warming, that is the most happening thing in our world nowadays, because we are all affected by global warming. You just see 2019 today, like take today to 2019 summer, it's very hot. That is why, because of the deforestation. Because of deforestation, there is a huge amount of heat which is being absorbed into the atmosphere, and there is no chance for the heat to get escaped, as there are no trees around us. So that is the reason we are having a high temperatures this summer, right? And the next condition is, or the next consequence is drought. The next consequence is drought. So when you talk about these droughts, what are these droughts? Droughts are the conditions where you see that there is no food available or no water available for a long time. That is called famine, right? So droughts are usually occurred because of the high temperatures. And when there is a high temperature, we all know that there is a water content present in the soil, that is moisture present in the soil. So when this moisture present in the soil, due to the high temperatures, it gets evaporated, right? As it is getting evaporated, it will leave the soil dry. And when there is a dry condition, will a farmer be able to cultivate a land? No. Will the soil be fertile anymore to crop plants? No. So that is the reason that leads to drought condition, and it ultimately leads to a situation called famine, where these people start fighting for food and water. There will be a shortage of food and water for a long period, right? And the next consequence of deforestation. When you talk about the next consequence, that is also to be considered, because it is loss of soil properties. We know that soil is the most essential thing in our life, right? The plants grow in the soil. The roots take up the minerals and water from the soil. So if the soil loses its property, will you be able to grow a plant? Obviously not. Due to this deforestation, you see that the topmost layer of the soil which is present will be carried away by the wind, and that is said to be soil erosion. And when the soil erosion happens, you see that gradually the fertility of the soil is lost in that particular place. And slowly, as soil fertility is lost, slowly you see that the growth of the plants is also reduced. The growth of the plants is also reduced. You see that the number of plants gets reduced because there is no fertility in the soil. They cannot obtain nutrients from the soil. So ultimately what happens? The land becomes dried up. Slowly it loses its property of fertility. There is no water which is present because it gets evaporated, and ultimately it leads to a condition called formation of a desert, and that leads to the land becomes a desert, and that process is said to be desertification. So desertification is also a consequence because of your deforestation. And then we all know that soil has a great tendency to hold water, right? And we know that the water which is present in the ground is said to be groundwater. So you see that if the soil has no capability to hold the water, or if it loses its capacity to hold the water, will the groundwater be recycled? Obviously not, because when you're cutting down the trees and forests and using the lands for construction purpose, you see everywhere it is a floor. There is no soil found. And when there is no soil, how does the soil retain the water? What are the sources in which way the water gets retained into the soil? That is through rivers, lakes, or through rainfall, right? When there is a rainfall, you see that the soil retains the water, and it gets seeped into the deeper layers of the soil where the groundwater can be replenished. But due to this deforestation, as you are building up many things, you cannot expect the groundwater to remain the same. The groundwater level gets reduced, right? And the water retaining capacity is also lost because the soil is no more seen, because everywhere it is floor, right? So these are the consequences of deforestation. Now I think these are alarming consequences. We never knew, or we may knew that the deforestation may lead to troubles, but you might not have realized actually what are the troubles which are caused due to this deforestation. We have been seeing that these are the different consequences where a human has to face out for his greedy benefits. Now, what has to be done? What is to be done to control, or to say to some extent to stop these consequences? Yes, you need to preserve the wildlife and plants. So that is what we are going to see in this next concept, that is conservation of forests and wildlife. So when you talk about conservation of forests and wildlife, we know that this conservation is most important thing, so that you can preserve the wildlife and the plants. And you see, when you visit a national park or when you visit a sanctuary, you see that in that particular area, those particular species of flora and fauna are protected so that they don't become extinct. At the same time, they can live happily in their natural surroundings. So non-government officials also work for this sanctuaries and national parks and say biodiversity parks, so that they can protect the flora and fauna in that area. At the same time, the government has come up with so many policies to protect this wildlife and plants. But unfortunately, we being greedy, we just go and kill the animals for our pleasure. Yes, the most famous actor Salman Khan, you all know, right? We know that he has a huge fan following. In spite of that, you have seen him many a times in the newspapers for his hunting animals for out of his pleasure. He was being accused to hunt animals in the forest and killing them, right? So what is that we are going to do? Out of our greed and out of our pleasure, we are harming the environment, and where we are being ending up with consequences like this. So you have to take an initiative that we should not kill animals. Rather, if you don't preserve also, no one bothers, but don't kill the animals. It is not that you have to preserve. Even if you don't preserve also, it is not a matter, but don't kill the animals or don't go for the deforestation, right? So you can see that from this lesson, you need to know few definitions like biosphere, which is said to be a part of the earth where living organisms exist. A part of the earth where living organisms exist. And whereas a biodiversity, you have often been hearing me pronouncing these words in the lesson. So let me tell you what are these. So biodiversity, a variety of organisms existing, their interrelationship among each other, at the same time their relationship with the environment. And sanctuaries, areas where you can see animals are protected from any kind of disturbances. So there are people hired for all these places, so that their duty is to protect these animals and plants. National parks. So national parks, so areas which are reserved for the animals where they can freely move and use the natural surroundings. See, generally forest is a natural home for all the animals, right? So as we are destructing or destroying those things, we have to build up such parks where they can feel the natural habitat and can freely move in such parks. So biosphere reserve, these are usually larger areas which are protected, where the lands have been conserved or protected for wildlife, animals, and traditional life of tribal people is also living in that area. That means they protect the wildlife, animals and plants. Apart from that, even the tribals living in those particular areas. This is how you can actually conserve the wildlife and plants. So you need to take an initiative. See, not if you're not protecting, it's not that you have to kill. So please see that you don't kill. See, if you have a pet at home, you pamper it like anything, right? In the same way, why don't you think that every animal is a pet of yours, right? Don't try to poach the animals or kill the animals for the pleasure. At the same time, try to reduce the usage of the things like carbon dioxide, or you can say let us not do such activities where you can have to bear the consequences of deforestation, due to which one fine day you may be left with only global warming, which may result or end up with a temperature where we cannot withstand.